Have you ever waited for something you desperately wanted? Maybe a new job, a friend, or an answer to prayer. Waiting tests our patience and faith. In Genesis 16, we meet Abram and Sarai, a couple clinging to God's promise of countless descendants. But there's a problem. They're old and still childless. 10 years have passed in Canaan, and hope is fading. Their story is more than ancient history. It's about real people wrestling with doubt and longing. Even people of great faith can get tired of waiting. Genesis 16 invites us into their struggle, a mirror for our own impatience. What happens when we try to help God out? This chapter shows us the cost of running ahead of God's timing. But it also reveals a God who sees us, even in our mess. Let's open our hearts to the lessons in this powerful story. Let's step into the tent with Abram and Sarai. Sarai's heart ached as the years passed without a child. Desperate, she told Abram, "The Lord has kept me from having children. Sleep with my servant Hagar. Perhaps I can build a family through her." In their culture, this was a common solution, but it was born from pain and impatience. Abram agreed, and Hagar became pregnant. But instead of joy, the household filled with jealousy and conflict. Hagar looked down on Sarai, and Sarai blamed Abram for her suffering. Tension poisoned their relationships. Abram, caught in the middle, told Sarai to do as she wished. Sarai mistreated Hagar so harshly that Hagar fled into the desert. What began as a plan to fulfill God's promise ended in heartbreak and division. Their attempt to force a solution only deepened their pain. The perfect plan had led to a broken home. Sometimes our own plans create more problems than they solve. This is what happens when we try to take control instead of trusting God. The story now follows Hagar, alone and afraid. Even in her lowest moment, God was not finished with her. The next part of the story belongs to Hagar in the wilderness. Let's see what happens next. Have you ever tried to fix something without following the instructions, only to make things worse? That's what happened with Abram and Sarai. They had God's promise, but impatience led them to write their own plan. Their choice created pain that rippled through generations. Impatience whispers, "God has forgotten you. Take control." But faith means trusting God's timing, even when it's hard. When we rush ahead, we often create problems God never intended. Our Hagar moments come when we force solutions instead of waiting. God's delays are not denials. His silence is not absence. Patience is active trust. Believing God's plan is better, even when it's slower. Genesis 16 calls us to deeper trust and peace in the waiting. True faith waits for God's perfect timing. Alone in the wilderness, Hagar was desperate and afraid. She had run from pain, only to find herself lost and vulnerable. But God saw her. An angel found Hagar by a spring and called her by name. "Hagar, servant of Sarai, where have you come from, and where are you going?" God met her in her pain, not as a mistake, but as a person with a future. The angel told her to return to Sarai, but also gave her a promise. "You will have a son, name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard your misery." Hagar realized she was seen and heard by God. She called him El Roi, the God who sees me. In her darkest moment, she discovered she was not invisible. God knew her name and cared about her future. When we feel lost or forgotten, we can remember Hagar. El Roi sees us too. God's compassion reaches even the most overlooked. The story of Sarai, Abram, and Hagar is a lesson in relationships. Pain led to blame, pride, and jealousy, each choice fueling the next. When plans fail, it's easy to point fingers, but healing begins with honesty and responsibility. Comparison and envy only deepen wounds. God calls us to trust His unique plan for each of us, not to measure ourselves against others. Hagar was told to return to a hard place, but God sent her back with a promise and a new understanding of His care. Sometimes God doesn't remove our hardships but gives us strength to endure them. In our own struggles, we can hold on to the truth that God sees us. He hasn't forgotten us. He gives us what we need for the journey. Healthy relationships grow when we face pain honestly and trust God's guidance. The story challenges us to seek peace, not blame. God's presence is with us even in the hardest places. Genesis 16 ends with unresolved tension. Hagar returns, the promise to Abram and Sarai is still unfulfilled. Yet hope remains. God's promises stand, even when our plans fail. He is faithful even when we are not. Where are you tired of waiting? Where are you tempted to take control? This story invites us to be honest about our impatience and trust God's grace. God sees the unseen, hears the unheard, and loves the overlooked. Hagar, an outsider, received God's blessing, proof of his wide mercy. No matter how lost we feel, we are never beyond God's reach. The God who saw Hagar sees you today. He knows your name and holds your future. Let this story inspire you to trust, wait, and love with grace. God's plan is always worth the wait.